Continuing our series, and each one reach one. And I really love this series. It's one that's been passionate for me and a part of kind of my DNA in a lot of ways, and what we should be doing as churches, and kind of how you move through that. This Friday, me and Kristen finally saw the movie I Can Only Imagine. We've been told by everyone we should have seen it months ago. We finally watched it. And I've seen Mercy Me in concert several times because I like to go to concerts. If you don't, Mercy Me is the band that sings the song I Can Only Imagine. He wrote it. And I remember the song, watching the movie reminded me of his testimony. And he was talking about how he wrote the song after his dad passed away. It was kind of, has anyone ever tried to write a song before or anything like that? It's really hard. He's like, yeah, I wrote the song in about 10 minutes. A song like that in 10 minutes. One that it was their first ever single, but it's probably still their most popular song by the band. Wrote it in 10 minutes. I have friends that are musicians that write songs, that record CDs, and they spend hours, sometimes days on one song, and it still doesn't come out anything near I Can Only Imagine came out. But the movie kind of had me thinking a little bit. It was thinking with what we're talking about this week. And it reminded me of a lot of kind of the last words, because it was kind of showing part of him and his dad's relationship and how that formed. And I won't spoil, so I won't give much more than that. But it made me think a lot about my mom. As some of you may know, my mom passed away 8 years ago when I was about 20. And I was thinking about some of the last conversations we had. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is what we talked about. And, the conversation, I remember she was in the hospital. I was actually at a children's quizzing event. I was helping with kids quizzing. And when we were there, I left that Friday night, came up to the hospital because they're hey, things aren't looking great. And we went up there, and me and my mom talked, and I was the last person to talk to her. And I remember, we talked about, if she was ready, and, in heaven, we talked about those things. But then we, said, of course, I love you, and go through that stuff. And she told me, we're there, she's like, go back, the kids need you, go back, help the kids. I'll still be here when you get back. And so I went back, because that's what she told me to do. And we got back, and that Saturday we came back, and it got done at noon. I drove straight back, and we got there, I don't know, probably 1-ish. And she was still alive, and she passed away about 30 minutes to an hour later. So she kept her word that she was there, but that had me thinking kind of the last words. The biggest regret I usually hear on the last words is when someone dies suddenly, it's the last thing we said to each other was an argument. Or the last thing we said was hateful words, or, I didn't get to say I love you, or I didn't get to say whatever. And you think about it, because the last words usually hold a significance, hold an importance that we have. It's not something that, they're not empty words to us. Like with me and my mom, that was the last conversation we had, and one of the few that I know I will probably always remember. But our words that we choose aren't always that way. And what we're looking at today will be some of Jesus' last words before he ascended into heaven. So it's the weight, the importance that he has with that. Just to do a quick recap, last week's focus, we're called to bring God's love to others. We looked at one of the most famous scriptures. That's John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. Most of us, even if you're not a Christian, you've heard that scripture and seen it on signs. And it was that it's God's love that sent his son, and it's through God's love that we should love others. Because if you guys are like me, sometimes there's people that are just unlovable. Usually they're your own family. If you're like me, sometimes you got that crazy uncle that just drives you insane every time you see him. And I think everyone has at least one crazy aunt or uncle. That's how families work. It's made that way. But God's love is for us to love others. It's to love everyone. It's not to love just the people that we like, not just the good people, not just the wealthy people. It's for everybody. And this week is the focus, as we're thinking the last words, but also the followers of Christ have an obligation to tell people about Jesus. If we call ourselves Christians, if you call yourself a Christian, it's an obligation to tell people about Jesus. The way that we talk, the way that we walk, the way that we act, the way we communicate with each other are all going to show other people either Jesus or show other people something completely different. And I think that's something that we can look to understand if you're a Christian. That's part of it. And I like the word obligation because it's not like it's a suggestion. We were talking about speed limits earlier. I usually refer, it's a suggestion, somewhere around there. But this wasn't a suggestion, kind of like my friend the highway trooper always tells me, it's not a suggestion, it's a limit, it's a hard line, this is what you're supposed to do. And that's how this is. It was an obligation. We're supposed to. And it's not, you're out there and you're beating people over the head with Bibles, but it's the way that we live. Because I promise you, if you have non-Christian friends, when you do something stupid, they know. They pay attention. They take note. When you say something stupid, they take note. And family, again, they're usually the best at this. You want to try, if you're a Christian, witness to your non-Christian sibling. Tell me what they'll throw back in your face. You remember when you were 7 years old and you did this? It goes back a ways. But it's part of an obligation for us to tell others about Jesus. And none of us are perfect. We all have our faults. And I think if we wait till we feel that we have all the answers, we'll be waiting, we'll die, we still won't feel we have all the answers, and we'll have never told anyone anything, because most of us aren't experts. And even if you are an expert, I know people that could tell me this book, frontwards, backwards, memorization, and they would tell me, I don't know if I'm ready. They're like, I don't know if I can talk to people. What if they ask me this, or what if they ask me that? But it's not about having all the answers, it's just about knowing some, about knowing Jesus and allowing Him to work through us, because there's nothing more fake that we can be than be the person that has all the answers. So that's that place that we can work from. The scripture we're looking at today is actually one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. It's Matthew 28, 16 through 20. This verse here at the very end is the very last part of the book of Matthew. This is also recorded in Luke and Mark, the same setup. The only book of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that it's not in is John. It just shows a little bit different view. But with these three, it's in all three. So one part of that is, this is very important. These are Jesus' last words before He ascends into heaven. So he's died on a cross. He's rose from the dead. He's been on earth. He's shown up to them a few times. But He told them to meet me here. And, this will be, the final place we'll talk. Meet me here. So that's where they're going. That's where we'll pick up at, where they meet. And it's so important because, like I was talking about with, my mom, and, kind of talking about me with I can only imagine, is these were Jesus' last words before He left. Recorded last words. So if your last words are going to be important, you're not going to be like, hey, make sure the stove's on. Make sure you got the beans boiling. It's not going to be a thing like that. It's going to be like, hey, this is important. Know this. So we'll go ahead and start in verse 16. And verse 16 says, Then the 11 disciples left for Galilee, going to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw Him, they worshipped Him, but some of them doubted. We'll come back to that part. Some of them doubted. Verse 18, Jesus came and told His disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Then this is the verse that's usually left off from the last one. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The place I want to pick up is with going back here, some of them doubted. With that, when they saw Him, they worshipped Him, but some of them doubted. That's a different way of seeing doubt than what we would normally see. With doubt, the word that He's actually using that we see as doubt in the original language that it was written in is saying that some of them, it wasn't a disbelief of doubt, but they couldn't comprehend it. And if we were all totally honest, you saw a guy die, days before, not even a month before you saw a guy die, he's standing in front of you, you're going to have a little bit of hard time comprehending. I mean, if we're all totally honest. Because how many of us have seen someone come back to life like a week or more later? Anybody? Right, none of us have. So them having a little bit of hard time comprehending what's going on, I think is very well very well going to happen to anybody. I think like today, I think there'd definitely be some people fainting. You can see that. There'd be some fainters probably. If Jesus showed up right here in this room, there's, like I've talked about it before, but if you're at somebody's funeral and then they stand up, get out of the casket and walk down, you're going to flip out. You're going to be like, what happened? So it's a understanding that some of them doubted. They had a hard time understanding, like, how did this happen? How could this happen? And that's where it was coming from. It wasn't a place of saying that, you see Jesus in the flesh after he died. I'm having a hard time believing that he really did this. They knew, they saw, some of them were there and present. So it's not a doubt in their faith, but it's a doubt in how did this even happen? So that's the first thing to see. And the second thing with that is that kind of going back to his last words. So if this was the last thing he says to his disciples, it'll hold weight. Like I said, the last thing me and my mom talked about was being ready for heaven. And he's saying, you need to go make disciples of all the nations, go to all the peoples, and then teach these new disciples that you make how to live, how to understand all the teachings, how to obey them. And that's what you're supposed to do. Those were his last words. If you were on your deathbed, and I think most people have thought about this, if you admit it or not, if you were on your deathbed, what would be the thing you would say to your loved ones? Like, what would you say? I think of Genesis, the book of Genesis. There's the two people, Isaac and Jacob. Jacob's known as Israel. They were father and son. And they were part of, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all part of the family line that you hear about in Genesis. They make up the latter portion of Genesis. With them, their last words to their kids was a blessing. They prayed a blessing over their child, and Jacob stole his brother's blessing, and that was the whole storyline of that, because his brother was the oldest and he was the youngest. Then when Jacob blessed his many kids, he gave 12 blessings. So that was the blessings he passed down. That was the blessing he gave. And those were his last words, and he wanted them to hold significance. So I think of mine the same way. If we were in that place, we don't want our last words to be something that is meaningless. You don't want to tell your kids something and then to be like, what does that even mean? You want to tell them something and it's like, this is important. You need to know this. You need to do this. You need to follow this. So his last words had weight. And that's why I think one of the reasons it's so important for us to know is that it's important to make disciples and not make believers. In the church today, our main focus, it seems like, not as in church here, but as in a capital C, has been on making believers, but not on making disciples. That's the kind of church I grew up in. It's the kind of church most of us grew up in. It's the 21st century church. It's about, do you believe? Yes, then you can kind of move on to the next one. It's not that making believers isn't important, but it's that just believing is not going to be enough for us to have a very good life. Believing is what we need for faith. It's what we need for Jesus to save us. But if that's all we have to move forward, that's not teaching any training of what Jesus said to do. It's a tough road. So if that's all we have is that, and that's where the church has failed. Because it's not the individual's job to, go to the school of hard knocks and figure out faith themselves. It's not their job to go and say like, okay, this is how this goes, or this is how this goes. It's the church's job. They're supposed to teach, or you're supposed to go, and the individual's supposed to teach them, okay, this is how you go through this. If you didn't grow up in the church, does anyone remember how they learned how to read a Bible? Like, if you don't think about it, what other book is made like the Bible? 66 books. Chapters and lines and verses. I've not read another book that wasn't a holy book of some sort, or believed to be a holy book of some sort, that wasn't broken down into verses and chapters like this. You read any other book that way? It takes someone to teach someone that's never seen a Bible, never read one, how to use it. That's one. It's the Bible, praying. Praying is something completely abnormal to someone who's never had faith. It's not a normal thing, so for us it's teaching. And that's where it has to be important, in making disciples. And that's what Jesus was focusing on. Go and make disciples. Teach them to obey my rules. Teach them to obey my laws. Teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. And what I really like about Jesus' commands is that it wasn't the book of Leviticus. The reason I say it's because Leviticus, for one, if you've read it, is not the best book to read. Honestly, I'm going to be real honest here. When I first became a Christian, started reading the Bible, I'd be like, I think I got like half a chapter in Leviticus, and I'm like, I'm going to skip this book because I don't know what they're saying. And you know, you get through some of that stuff, and you're like, I don't understand this. And I've taken classes on how to read that, and I still read some of it and have to really focus on what I'm reading to even figure out what they're saying. Jesus really gave them two commands. He said, if you can do these two things, you'll fulfill all the law. Love God first, love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love people. That's it. You can do those two things, you'll fulfill all the commands. So it's teaching them that. It's teaching others to love other people. To love God first, but to love other people. And so a disciple, though, and I think where we get the definition with disciple is understanding just a little more on that. The believer is someone who believes, right? We can all, you believe in Jesus. I've met people who believe in Jesus who won't go to church. I have family who believe in Jesus who won't go to church, who have nothing to do with it, have no bones about it. This is what I believe he's real, but I have no interest in following him. A disciple is someone who follows Christ. It's the actual definition says it's a devoted follower of Christ. So sometimes that's understanding what is considered devoted. 1 hour a week, if that's all the time that we look to Christ or we act like Christ or we even kind of sound like Christ, but the rest of the week we sound like somebody else, that may not be considered devoted. That's not a devotion. That's not, okay, this is right, this is wrong, this is that. That's not devoted. So if it's part of it, so that's where it comes into the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we act, the way we move. This is what devotion looks like. So we have to look that direction and figure those things out and how we can move forward in that. So going and making disciples isn't going and making, okay, here's a new Christian. It's going and saying, here's a devoted follower of Christ. Make devoted followers. Not just someone who, I've said this prayer, I believe, now I can go back on to my merry way. But that's where you start. You start in that place, but that's not where we should finish. Believe is such a finicky thing, though, because I think a lot of us believe in different things. One, kids, they're not in this room, so but some may believe in mythical creatures that people celebrate during holidays, like, Easter bunnies and some of those crazy things like that we have taught them intentionally to believe. But we know the difference. That's believing. They're not devoted followers of the Easter bunny, though. We're not disciples of the Easter bunny, but we believe. That's that differentiation between the two. James 2:19. James is the brother of Jesus. So if you got your own brother to believe that you are the Son of God, he's obviously got some weight there. Because, he was able to get him. Because I like that. Getting your family to believe or to follow is one of the hardest things. James 2:19, Jesus' brother says, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. That's good for you. That's good. Even the demons believe this and they tremble in terror. He's saying that it's great to have faith. It's good to have faith. It's good to believe. But even, the demons have faith. Even they believe that God is real. There's one God and there's Jesus. And they tremble because if they know that his power, they know his might. They were thrown down from heaven. They know that. So when we look at that, believing's not enough because that doesn't differentiate us from a lot of people. We're in what most people consider like one of probably the top Christian tourist destinations in North America. I think most of us would agree that. You can go to shows here in town and there'll be Christian songs, Christian theme. I know several of the different people that own stuff here, the names, Shepherd of the Hills, like the town itself is based on Christian beliefs. Like that's where it was founded, that's where a lot of its background comes in. Even the people of Silver Dollar City Foundation and all those different places in town that you would think would be completely separate used to do stuff specifically for churches. There were multiple churches in this town that were paid for by certain large families like Hobby Lobby and the people that owned Silver Dollar City and founded it that donated that. So Branson has a heritage of being a Christian town. So I think most of us would say out of the 60,000 people within 10 miles, most of those people probably know of Jesus at the very least. And I would be willing to say that the majority would say, yeah, I believe in Jesus. But how many of those, out of the, say it's 50,000 out of 60,000, out of those that they say they believe in Jesus, how many of those are actually disciples of Jesus, or they just believe? And that's where we see ourselves, as there has to be a difference between believing and following. Because I can believe stuff all day, but if I don't follow, it doesn't make a difference. If I'm at work, I believe I'm going to get it done, but I never get it done, my likelihood to still have a job. Believing it'll happen versus, it actually happens. You actually have the footwork, you actually follow through, you're going to do it, is a different thing. If there's anything that comes from today, if you remember anything, I want you to remember this. It's that God did not call us to make believers. He called us to make disciples. As Christians, if you're a Christian, you weren't called you have to make a believer. And what I mean is, I'm not saying that people shouldn't become familiar with Jesus, that we should not bring people in to know Jesus. We should, but it shouldn't end there. It shouldn't stop with, okay, they believe, let's go on to the next one. It's all about that. And unfortunately, like I said, that is the DNA of the 21st century church. People will follow and probably have a number that they count that says, this is how many new believers we have this year. But I'm willing to say most denominations, most churches do not have a list of new disciples. This is people that were plugged into our discipleship groups or Sunday school. These are the people that are plugged in now. This is what grew. They don't track that number. It's about believers. And that's one of the places where the church has failed. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to see this message and for us to hear the message, that it's not about making just believers, about making disciples.